he knows that there are enormous risks in widening the war, and his army is depleted. They're pretty exhausted. They're still bogged down in Ukraine, and NATO is stronger.
Well, now, does the war between Russia and Ukraine have the characteristics of a global conflict? President Putin says it does, and next week, NATO representatives and Ukraine will meet to discuss the latest developments. This evening, Ukrainian military officials have confirmed the use of British Storm Shadow missiles. Well, let's hear from Sir Lawrence Freedman, who's Emeritus Professor of War Studies at King's College London. Good afternoon to you, Sir Lawrence.
Good afternoon.
I wonder how you read what we're hearing from Putin, the response from the West. Where are we at the moment?
We're in a difficult situation, and partly because there's a big uncertainty coming up, which is President Trump will be arriving for a second term on the 20th of January. So a lot of what's going on at the moment is messaging to Trump and his new appointments, and preparing for what people assume will be a diplomatic effort in January, February, to see if there's a way of bringing the war to an end. It won't be easy, it may fail, but that's what people are gearing up to. I think Putin's problem, contrary to what we've just heard, is his red lines have been passed regularly, but at the same time he's escalated regularly. He just hasn't escalated by attacking NATO countries, and he hasn't used nuclear weapons, but almost everything else he can do, he's done. The problem that he faced is that he made very explicit threats about allowing the use of ATACMS, the American system, and Storm Shadow, the UK-French system. And they've been used nonetheless in the Kursk region. And that was justified in part because he escalated by bringing North Koreans into the fight, and because he launched an absolutely massive series of strike against Ukrainian cities, attempting to take out their critical infrastructure for the winter. So I think there's a danger in getting over-focused on the nuclear question here. There's a lot of things he has done and can do that are pretty awful before you get there, and he's already done them.
Well, just so many things to unravel from that. What can he do short of going nuclear? That would be, as you say, pretty horrible. What do you think's most likely?
Well, first he's done them. I mean, there's a sort of sense that so far it's been all okay. It hasn't. When you look at the damage and devastation that's been done to Ukrainian cities and villages and towns, leaving aside the fact that he's engaged in a full-scale invasion. So what he was trying to do was to show he's got this brand new experimental missile, which he now says he's got a number of them. I think Western analysts are not quite sure how many, but it's a capability.
The hypersonic missile.
And it's an intermediate range missile, not a continental, but it's still got a long range. So he had a sort of a test, except it was on a Ukrainian city, to show that it worked, and it sort of did work, which isn't a surprise. But it's not something that he can't do by other means. There's been plenty of attacks with missiles. The issue is whether he's trying to show countries like Poland, Lithuania, Estonia, whatever, other countries that are supportive of Ukraine and quite close to the borders, that if necessary, he could strike them. And that's always been the case. It's never been in doubt that if he wanted to, he could strike them. The question is, does he really want a wider war? And I can't imagine why he would.
Oh, well, on that point, I mean, his reaction today or overnight, that says he's entitled to use Russian weapons against the military facilities of those countries that allow their weapons to be used against our facilities. Is the UK, amongst others, putting itself in the firing line? Do you think that's a threat that he could carry out? Because, Nina Khrushchev's response was, you've got to believe him.
I think you've got to read what he says very carefully. He claims a right for himself. He doesn't say necessarily he'll do it. So and this is always the case with Putin. He was making these threats the day he launched the invasion. So there's nothing particularly new in that. I think you have to take Putin seriously, and you have to recognize there are risks, but you also have to evaluate the risks of taking him too seriously. of holding back in support of Ukraine and allowing him a victory, which would cause enormous repercussions throughout Europe, because we overread what he's saying. He's had plenty of opportunities, if he wanted, plenty of reasons, because Western countries have been supporting Ukraine from day one. So he had plenty of reasons to attack if he wanted to, but he knows that there are enormous risks in widening the war, and his army is depleted. They're pretty exhausted. They're still bogged down in Ukraine, and NATO is stronger. So I don't think he'll be that keen, but he wants us to think that he might, and you can't absolutely preclude that he won't. So it's a dilemma for the West, but I think the response that we're seeing so far is the correct one.
I'll come back to the Western response in just a second, but people toss around the phrase World War III. Are we in it? Is it looming? With your obvious expert knowledge of history, what's your verdict on that?
First, you've got to remember that the world wars were world wars because of empires. This at the moment is a war contained in Europe with global ramifications, but it's not the same as a world war. We're talking about a European war at the moment. Normally, when people talk about world war, they're talking about nuclear weapons. World War III would be defined by the use of nuclear weapons. Nobody in this business should just say this won't happen and there's no risk at all, because the events can gather a momentum of their own, and we have to be well aware of that. But we also have to push it back onto Putin. This is not our responsibility. We didn't start by attacking Ukraine in the way that Russia attacked, and our security is very much at risk if Ukraine falls. So what I think is necessary here is for us to go back and be very clear: we have no desire for a world conflict or a wider European conflict, but our interests are engaged here, and we're defending our interests like he thinks he's defending his. And that we'll find out soon, I think, when Trump comes in, if there are ways by which we can align those interests or find a way that we can calm this situation down. But it's going to some compromises on his part and not just on ours.
Well, on that note, then, how best should the West respond now? Are they doing the right things? Are these talks in NATO going to sort of anger the Kremlin further?
Well, the Kremlin doesn't want us to do anything, so anything that we do will anger them. But this has been going on a long time. I think the unfortunate thing is these decisions should have been taken a long time ago and with a lot less fuss. I think it's really just what Ukraine is doing is an extension of things that were already done. They've already used Storm Shadow and ATACMS in the area, in the theatre of conflict. Russia claims this is Russian territory, for that matter, that they're on. They have attacked all round Russia with their own systems. So I think first, this is not as major an escalation on the Ukrainian side as it is being made out. And I think the decision should have been made quietly and without fuss a long time ago. It's sort of reached this sort of crisis point. I think NATO just needs to hold its nerve. Putin is well aware there's a new president coming in who many think will be more sympathetic to his concerns, and if I was him, I'd wait to see what he gets there, and I might also be thinking what I can do to see if I can get a deal to end a war which is hurting Ukraine a lot, but it's also hurting Russia.
Fascinating stuff. Professor Sir Lawrence Freedman, thank you very much for joining us there.